Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, live from the Liquid's headquarters for the Race to World First, and today I wanted to talk about the healing meta that we've seen so far. Currently, at the time of this video, both Echo and Method and Liquid are working on Echo of Neltharion, and so we're very deep into the race at this point and have a very full idea of how the healer meta is supposed to be looking for this, and so I wanted to talk about that compared to some of my expectations that I previously had. If you guys saw my raid tier list video, I was really expecting to see a 1 or 2 Resto Shamans and Preservation Evokers being featured really heavily. And I wasn't as high on like Holy Priests, for example, and yet we have seen a huge amount of Holy Priests and a very low amount of Disc Priests for the World First guilds. And so I kind of just wanted to talk about the damage patterns, the fights, and why this is really happening. This is the Warcraft logs, like raid progress that you're able to check up on, unless you see like the comps and what everybody's running with. And like I said, you've been seeing a crazy amount of Holy Priests constantly that you're looking at for all of these World First guilds, as well as a decent amount who are coming into like that World 20. But that's also where you start seeing some of like the old meta of having the Disc Priest, for example, being featured in more of like the World 20 guilds. But on the World First level, they've completely really moved away from that in its entirety. And I think part of that is due to some of the simplicity of the encounters that we've seen. Part of it is due to just like the variance that you see with some of the damage patterns. And I think another part is due to player defensives and getting better at coordinating defensives around things like Symbol of Hope. Now, if you haven't checked out Symbol of Hope, basically it knocks a minute off of all of these cooldowns for players. And so when you have a large amount, for example, of Devastation Evokers, being able to get your 30% damage reduction, for example, makes quite a bit of a difference. When you look at the overall compositions, there's sometimes 2 Hunters, sometimes only 1. Lots of Warlocks who are already very steady, Mages who are benefiting from Mirror Image, getting cooldown reduction, Paladins getting Divine Protection, which is a 1-minute cooldown, Druids getting Bark Skin, which is a 1-minute cooldown, Priest getting Desperate Prayer, which is a 1.5 minutes. There's a lot of low cooldown specs in there that are on the not as tanky side, right? So being able to reset the cooldown of Devastation Evokers, for example, makes them so much more tanky on these encounters. It makes them so much more survivable on these encounters, so we have a little bit less to worry about. Hunter, as always, sort of has its own problems, and some of the classes that are not benefiting as much, for example, with things like Unending Resolve. Well, obviously, knocking off a minute's still good. Your Warlocks are usually not the ones that you need to be worrying about nearly as much. I think some of the most notable things that I wanted to also talk about is the fact that Echo is the only World First guild that's had used Mistweaver Monk. And I think this is like crazy shocking. If you haven't seen this before, this is Rashok's damage intake. And you can see across the different guilds for their kills, the amount of damage taken and the patterns. And they're pretty much the same across the board. But I wanted to emphasize some of these fight timers in particular. So Rashok, of course, is going to have his charge smash, the overcharge clear, and then you have the intermission. And that's where you can see these spikes lasting for quite a bit longer of time. Then it goes into charge smash, longer period, then you have another intermission phase, and then you have to kill the boss before he basically murders everybody. Mistweaver, with this sort of like pseudo ramp play style, they've been messing around with, where they cast a lot of enveloping mists, and then it puts out a lot of renewing mist, and then they can spam Vivifies, is like nuts output, especially if you're able to feed them a little bit with their innovates. And then, of course, you have 3 healers, which are just overall pretty mana efficient. It makes a really big difference for the ease with which you can just crank output. The other thing is that their cooldowns are, I believe, around like the 2-minute. I think if you are running some of the talents, you can get it down to 2 minutes or 1 minute. And so it allows them to prep a lot of output for very specific moments in time. But Mistweaver's sustain, especially if they have the mana for it with their set bonus, is also much higher. And so having disc ramps in a fight like this, where it's about 40-second gaps between damage, makes it seem like it would be very good, but it's sort of awkward to like ramp for the first charge smash. Then the intermission, where it's like halfway through, is when you're actually able to put together your output. And then you can do like the later half of the charge smash here, and then you have to do not much through the intermission, and then it goes into the end of the fight, right? There's these moments where it goes high, low, but some of the encounter timers don't really seem to be very beneficial for it, and Disc's output is not outsized by other healers. It's not like you're doing so much extra. it seems like you're able to reverse some of the mechanics, but a lot of the output you're able to deal with more easily, especially if you have very steady output. Zaskarn, for example, is the same damage every single time, no matter what. Pretty much because you just have a blast wave and maybe some players who are taking a little bit extra trap damage. But most of the time, you need to make sure you have steady output when it comes to healing the unstable embers, and you need to make sure you're just healing through the blast wave. And so there's a number of times where the high mobility requirements, or like the pushback that are sort of required or featured on a fight like Zaskarn, starts kind of like inhibiting Disc. Notably, we saw Method busting out the Shaman nice and early for their raid progress, and this is a healer that I was really high on, and I'm surprised that more guilds are not running with it. We are seeing it more repped on Echo of Neltharion progress as we go right now, but I think it's sort of a perfect addition for a lot of what the encounters bring you. Both Rashok, Zaskarn, and Magmarax all have these areas where you need to be like really tightly jam-packed together, and it seems like that would be, more of Shaman's wheelhouse. In particular, for a fight like Zaskarn, Shaman in particular is going to do great to be able to just chain heal away onto the unstable Embers targets, making it substantially easier to provide that sort of spot healing. Whereas Disc, you have a lot of upfront healing out of your Radiance, but the low atonement duration really starts making it harder to contribute the right amount of healing in the right areas. Just like you'll have a diverse damage profile for DPSers, where you have some people in a world first environment who are great at killing off some of these golems, and some people who are just kind of tunneling boss the entire encounter. Having a varying profile for healing is also very important, depending on what extra debuffs are sort of thrown your way when it comes into it. And so one of the benefits of Holy Priest, and the reason that you're seeing all these world first guilds, again, this is Zaskarn, running 2 of them, is because they have such a flexible profile when they have all the holy words at their disposal, which then, and really high passive output by just kind of casting Perv Mending on cooldown all the time. It makes it so that they're constantly yielding really high healing, even if they're not actively casting the entire time. And so for something like Magmarax, this is really significant. Let's see right here. On Magmarax, this is very significant because the damage curve that we're able to see is so steady, and it continuously increases over time. Same thing, of course, for Echo and all of their kills. It steadily increases over time, and it's almost like the opposite of a lot of encounters you think about, where there isn't really burst, it's like drops in damage, almost, when there is no more additional soaks, when all of the pools have been soaked and it's just ticking damage. Or when a player where players are stacking together and using large defensives to be able to mitigate like the soaked magma spittle. They're using all their defensives here, and then they use all their defensives there to like mitigate raw amounts of the incoming damage from the soak and from the stacks that everybody currently is sitting on. It's almost like an anti-discipline fight in a lot of cases. And so this is, I think, where you're really starting to see steady output and just overall output, overall high HPS being king, because I really suspected we would see Shaman be highly represented in like all of these fights, because if you could stack and you need healing, oh my god, Spirit Link's so good. But even Echo busting out the Mistweaver for this encounter, and Liquid using the Druid, for example, to fill in their versatility buff, since, Boomkin's kind of mid at the moment, has been very fascinating to see. Partially, like I said, because they've sort of balanced out some of the healing profiles that are going on, but also that Disc is just not that insane anymore, having the high effort and high work that's required for the spec. And now it's just become a lot of like raw HPS checks that teams are really required for the World First race. It's probably one of the most surprising things that I've been able to see thus far in the World First race. And so my expectations for something like Echo of Neltharion is still that we are going to see a lot of Shamans being busted out. Like I said, I don't know if Boomkin's going to be good or good enough for an encounter like Neltharion, although we do currently see Echo running with one at the moment. I don't know if that's going to be true across the board with Method as well as Liquid. We'll have to see, because Method is still currently running with Lorgok and Bangers. So it seems like they're like okay with it at the moment. But there's an interesting way of there's interesting variance in terms of what people are running with, which actually seems like the class balance is kind of in a good spot. I do think, however, when it comes to Sarkareth, there is possibly a chance for you to see Disc Priest in the World First race at the moment. because of how much burst damage is coming out from like the glittering surges that are happening at the beginning and end of phase 1. So I'll keep an eye out for that. But if there's ever any questions that you guys have about the World First Race, World First Healing, or anything while I'm on site with Liquid, be sure to let me know down in the comments down below. And of course, huge thanks to the patrons who are making all of these videos possible. Be sure to check it out in the description if you want to help out some more content. Thanks, guys.